The alarm shrieked through the old prison in suburban Texas, red emergency lights flashing cold against concrete walls. A group of inmates rushed a thin man mopping the floor, fists and makeshift weapons flying. Blood splattered on tiles as his voice choked out. "Please stop. I'm just a janitor." But as the fatal blow came down, he raised his head, eyes cold as steel. I, David, 42, single dad, quietly set down my mop and whispered, "You have no idea who you just touched." The inmates froze, suddenly sensing they'd made a terrible mistake. Everything was about to change. My name is David Miller. At 42, I've mastered the art of being invisible, a skill I learned in the military and perfected in civilian life. 3 things define me: a tall, lean frame that most people underestimate, a long scar on my left shoulder from a mission I'm not allowed to talk about, and eyes that carry the weight of things I've seen and done in service to my country. After leaving Delta Force, I took a job as a janitor at Huntsville Correctional Facility. The pay was modest but steady, and most importantly, the night shift meant I could be home when my 12-year-old daughter Sophie needed me. Our apartment in Dallas's working-class district was small. Gray walls, a worn wooden dining table, everything secondhand but clean. Every evening, I'd wash Sophie's shoes and place them by the door, a small ritual to remind her that even though we didn't have much, she still had someone who cared. At the prison, I kept my head down and my past buried. David Miller. The janitor was a different person from Staff Sergeant David Miller, Delta Force operator. That man had done things, necessary things, terrible things, that had no place in a civilian life. Most inmates ignored me. To them, I was just another underpaid worker pushing a mop, invisible as the walls. But one night, everything changed. I was cleaning C Block when I heard shouting, then the distinctive sound of violence, fists hitting flesh, the clatter of a body hitting concrete. Through the corridor, I saw them. 5 inmates from the Aryan Brotherhood had cornered Joe Thompson, the new janitor, a 60-year-old former mechanic trying to make ends meet after prison destroyed his life. They had him on the ground, kicking him with the casual brutality of men who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. "Where's our cut, old man?" the leader snarled, swinging a metal rod. "You work our block. You pay our tax." Joe was trying to curl into a ball, protect his vital organs. I'd seen that position before, in war zones, refugees trying to survive another day of hell. I should have hit the panic button, should have let the guards handle it, should have stayed invisible. Instead, I moved. My mop became a weapon, years of training translating everyday objects into tools of combat. I swept the leader's legs out from under him before he could register my approach, then used the mop handle to disarm the inmate with the metal rod. The other 3 backed off immediately, recognizing something in my movements that their prison-honed instincts identified as dangerous. "Touch him again," I said quietly, "and I'll show you what real violence looks like." They fled, leaving their leader groaning on the floor. Joe looked up at me, blood streaming from his nose, confusion and gratitude mixing in his expression. Who are you?" he asked. "Just a janitor," I said, helping him to his feet. "Like you." But we both knew that wasn't true anymore. Later, as I cleaned the blood off my mop, ironic, cleaning the evidence of cleaning violence, I found my lunchbox knocked over in the chaos. A cheap plastic container from Walmart, $3.99, still showing traces of Sophie's tomato sauce from the spaghetti she'd made me for dinner. The contrast hit me hard. A man who'd once operated behind enemy lines, now mopping prison floors and eating lunch from a bargain store container. But that lunchbox meant I could afford Sophie's school supplies. That mop meant she had a roof over her head. Some battles you fought with weapons. Others you fought with quiet dignity and a steady paycheck. Tonight, I'd fought with both. Joe wouldn't leave me alone after that night. He appeared wherever I was working, helping with tasks he didn't need to help with, asking questions I didn't want to answer. "You're not just some janitor," he said one evening as we emptied trash from the cafeteria. "The way you moved, the way those guys backed down, that's military training, special forces, right?" I kept my focus on the trash bags. "I'm a single dad who mops floors, that's all you need to know." But Joe was persistent, and eventually loneliness wore down my walls. We started talking during breaks, sharing coffee in the supply closet that became our unofficial refuge from the prison's constant tension. Joe told me his story. A skilled mechanic who'd lost everything to alcohol, made stupid decisions, served time, and now was trying to rebuild a life with nothing but determination and a mop handle. I had a family once, he said, staring into his coffee. Wife, 2 kids, drove them away with my drinking. Now they won't even take my calls. I understood that particular pain, not from addiction, but from the way violence and secrets could erode relationships until nothing remained. What about you? Joe asked. You got someone? My daughter, Sophie. She's 12, smart, kind, everything I'm not. You're a good man, David. Don't sell yourself short. I laughed bitterly. Good men don't have my history. That night I came home late. Sophie was still awake, working on math homework at our kitchen table, wearing her mother's old sweater, the only thing left from the woman who left us when the nightmares got too bad. Dad, what happened to your hand? She asked, noticing the bruised knuckles I'd tried to hide. Just bumped it on a door, I lied, hating myself for it. Sophie didn't push, just quietly poured me a glass of milk and set it in front of me. Such a small gesture, but it reminded me of moments in the field, sharing water with teammates, the simple acts of care that kept you human when everything else tried to make you a machine. The next evening, I brought Joe home for dinner. Sophie was wary at first. She'd learned early that trust had to be earned, but Joe had a gentle way about him that put her at ease. Your dad tells me you're good at math, Joe said, helping her with a particularly tricky problem. I'm okay, Sophie replied. Dad helps me, but he's better at building things. Like what? She showed him the birdhouse I'd made her, a simple project that had taken me 3 evenings because I kept getting the angles wrong, my combat-trained hands awkward with delicate woodworking. Your dad's a craftsman, Joe said, examining my mediocre carpentry with the generous eye of someone who knew what it meant to try. Later, Sophie found the mop I'd brought home to clean. Prison rules said damaged equipment came out of our pay, and joked, Dad, you look like a superhero with a really weird weapon. The comment made both Joe and me laugh, but there was truth in it. Sometimes the most powerful thing wasn't the weapon. It was the will to stand between harm and someone who needed protecting. After Sophie went to bed, Joe and I sat on the small balcony overlooking the apartment complex parking lot. I'm guessing Delta Force, Joe said, or maybe SEALs, something elite anyway. I didn't confirm or deny, just looked at the Dallas skyline and remembered other cities, other nights, other missions. I lost people, I finally said. Good soldiers, friends, some died quickly, some didn't, and every single one died following my orders. Joe was quiet for a long moment. That why you left? I left because I realized I was becoming something my daughter shouldn't have to see. The violence was getting easier, the decisions colder. I had to choose, keep serving or keep my humanity. Seems like you chose right. Most days, I'm not sure. I'm mopping prison floors while men with half my training are still out there making a difference. You're raising a daughter alone, working an honest job, protecting people who need it. That's making a difference, David. That's the hardest mission there is. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that trading my rifle for a mop wasn't surrender, but transformation. On the kitchen counter, I'd hidden our latest utility bill, Dallas Water, $58,220. Another reminder that civilian battles were fought on different terms, but were no less real. Sophie had drawn on the envelope, probably while I was at work. A stick figure family of 3, holding hands. She'd added Joe to our family portrait without even asking if he belonged. Maybe that was the point. Family wasn't about asking permission or earning belonging through blood. It was about showing up, sharing milk at midnight, and protecting each other when the world got dangerous. Thanks, I told Joe, for being here. Sophie doesn't have many people. Neither do I, Joe replied. Maybe that's why we found each other. Through the window, Sophie's nightlight glowed softly, a princess lamp from a thrift store that she cherished like gold. Some treasures were priceless, not because they cost money, but because they reminded you what you were fighting for. Word spread through Huntsville Correctional like wildfire. The janitor in C Block wasn't what he seemed. Prison hierarchies are built on reputation, and nothing travels faster than the story of a man who could disarm 5 Brotherhood members without breaking a sweat. Rico Valdez, leader of the Latin Kings inside Huntsville, decided that reputation needed to be addressed. 3 nights later, I was cleaning the main corridor when the lights went out. Emergency backup kicked in, bathing everything in red. I knew immediately this was planned. The prison gangs couldn't control much, but they could control darkness. "Joe, get back," I said quietly. My former colleague had been helping me, and now he was in danger because of my actions. From the shadows, 12 men emerged. Not just Latin Kings. They'd called in favors from other gangs, united by the need to prove that no janitor, no matter how skilled, could challenge prison power. Rico stepped forward, holding a shiv, prison-made knife, rusted but deadly, wrapped in contraband electrical tape. It was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of underground authority. "Heard you used to be somebody," Rico said, his accent heavy but his English clear. "Special Forces, they say. Delta, that right?" I didn't answer, just positioned myself between the approaching threat and Joe. "Here's the thing, soldier boy," Rico continued, circling slowly. "Out there, maybe you were hot shit. In here I'm God, and gods don't let janitors embarrass their disciples." "I don't want trouble," I said, my voice carrying the same calm I'd used before raids, before extractions, before moments when death was a heartbeat away. "Just want to do my job and go home to my daughter. Should have thought about that before you put hands on our people." The attack came fast, coordinated, practiced, the kind of group assault that had been rehearsed in yard time and cell blocks. But they'd rehearsed against other prisoners, not against someone who'd spent years learning to fight multiple opponents in hostile territory. My body moved on instinct, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would be too slow. The mop became a staff, then a lever, then a distraction. I used their numbers against them, positioning so one would block another's attack, creating collision points in their advance. A shiv scraped my ribs, shallow, painful, but not incapacitating. I disarmed its wielder and kept moving. Stay mobile, control the space, never let them surround you completely. Joe, despite his age and lack of training, grabbed a fire extinguisher and started spraying, creating chaos that gave me openings. Within 90 seconds, half of them were down. Not dead, not even seriously injured, but down. The others backed off, recognizing a level of skill that prison yard toughness couldn't match. Rico stood his ground, shiv still in hand, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. Pride versus survival, authority versus reality. "You win," he finally said. "But you know what this means, right? You can't just be a janitor anymore. Everyone knows now." "I was never just a janitor," I replied, blood seeping through my uniform shirt. "But I'm not a soldier anymore either. I'm a father who needs this job to feed his daughter. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to spread the word that I'm off limits, and in exchange, I won't report this to the warden and trigger a lockdown that'll cost you your privileges for months." Rico considered this. Prison politics was about leverage, and I just offered him a way to save face while avoiding consequences. "Deal," he said. "But if you ever need work that pays better than mopping floors, you let me know. Skills like yours, plenty of people would pay." "I'm done with that life," I said firmly. After the guards finally came, someone had triggered an alarm, and order was restored. Joe helped me back to the supply closet. "Jesus Christ, David," he said, hands shaking as he pressed paper towels against my wound. "What the hell did you used to do?" "Things I'm not proud of," I said. "Things that were necessary but cost pieces of my soul. You saved my life. Again. You sprayed a fire extinguisher at armed inmates. You saved yourself." When I finally made it home, hours late, blood cleaned off but ribs aching, Sophie was waiting up, worried. "Dad, the prison called. They said there was an incident." I couldn't lie to her anymore. Couldn't pretend that David Miller, the janitor, was all there was to me. Sophie, I need to tell you something about who I used to be. I told her a sanitized version, served in special operations, did dangerous work, left because I wanted to be a better father. I didn't tell her about missions that went sideways, about decisions that haunted me, about the men I'd killed in service to something bigger than myself. She listened quietly, then walked over and wrapped her arms around me, careful of my injured ribs. I don't care what you used to do, she said. I care that you're here now, that you make me breakfast and help with homework and wash my shoes every night because you think I don't notice. That broke something in me, or maybe healed it. I held my daughter and cried for the first time since leaving the service, all the grief and guilt and fear finally finding release. I was so afraid you'd think less of me, I whispered. Dad, you're my hero. You always have been. Later, as I tucked her into bed, she gave me the bracelet she'd been making in crafts class. Simple fabric braids in red, white, and blue. It's so you remember, she said, that being my dad is more important than being a soldier. I tied it around my wrist, feeling its weight, lighter than dog tags, lighter than weapons, but somehow heavier with meaning. The next morning, I returned to work. The inmates gave me space, respecting the boundary Rico had established. Joe worked beside me, and together, we fell into the rhythm of ordinary labor. But nothing was ordinary anymore. I'd stepped out of invisibility, and now everyone knew. The janitor was someone else, someone dangerous, someone who'd chosen this life deliberately. The question was whether I could maintain that choice or whether violence would find me again. Some wars, I was learning, never really ended. They just changed uniforms. The prison administration knew what had happened. They had cameras everywhere, but chose to handle it quietly. The assistant warden called me into his office 3 days after the incident. Mr. Miller, he said, my personnel file open in front of him. We did some checking. Your military record is heavily redacted, which tells me everything I need to know. I said nothing, waiting. Several private security firms have contacted us. High-paying positions, international work. They seem very interested in hiring you. Not interested, I said immediately. The pay would be substantial, more in a month than you make here in a year. I have a daughter. She needs a father, not a paycheck with a forwarding address. The warden studied me for a long moment. That's what I told them you'd say, but I had to ask. He paused. Your job is secure here, Miller. What you did, stopping that riot before it spread, probably saved lives. But you need to understand that you've changed the dynamics. You can't go back to being invisible. He was right. Inmates nodded respectfully as I passed. Guards asked questions about my service. Even the other janitors treated me differently. Joe was the only one who still saw me as just David. You thinking about those offers? He asked one evening as we cleaned the cafeteria. Not for a second. I'm done with that world. What world you want to be in then? I thought about it. I want to be in the world where I fix things instead of breaking them, where I build instead of destroy. So build something, Joe said simply. The idea grew slowly. I'd always been good with my hands, and Sophie had been asking if we could fix the broken bicycles in our apartment complex. Kids without bikes, families without money to replace them. What if we started a workshop, I suggested to Joe one night. Small repair business, fix bikes, appliances, whatever people need. Charge what they can afford, do some for free. Joe's eyes lit up. I used to be a decent mechanic. Still remember most of it, even after all these years. We started small, using a corner of the apartment complex's maintenance room that the landlord let us use for free. Sophie became our operations manager, keeping track of jobs on a notebook we'd bought at the dollar store. Our first customer was Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B, whose wheelchair had a broken wheel that she couldn't afford to fix. How much? She asked nervously. No charge, I said. But if you know anyone else who needs help, send them our way. Word spread. Soon we were fixing bicycles, toasters, radios, anything mechanical that people thought was broken beyond repair. Sophie thrived in the workshop. She'd study her homework between jobs, asking questions about how things worked, why they broke, how to make them last longer. Dad, teaching me mechanics is like teaching me to see inside things, she said one evening. Not just machines, but problems. Everything has a solution if you look at it right. Joe, sober now for 3 months, found purpose in the work. His hands, steady and skilled, remembered their old competence. He taught Sophie techniques I didn't know, filling gaps in her education with his own experience. We transformed our small apartment into something approaching a home. The sunflowers Sophie planted on the balcony actually bloomed bright yellow against our gray building, visible proof that growth was possible even in hard soil. My mop, the one from the prison fight, stood in the corner of our workshop, a reminder of where I'd been and what I'd left behind. Sophie had joked about it being a weapon of mass construction now. The prison stayed in my life. I still worked there, still mopped floors, but it was no longer my whole identity. I was a father, a friend, a guy who fixed broken things in a workshop that smelled like motor oil and possibility. One evening, Joe pulled me aside, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. "My daughter called. First time in 5 years. She saw the news story about our workshop helping people, recognized my name. That's wonderful, Joe. She wants to meet, says her kids, my grandkids, need to know their grandfather." His voice cracked. "I don't know if I deserve that chance." I put my hand on his shoulder. None of us deserve most of the good things that happen to us. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't accept them with gratitude and work like hell to earn them every day after. The next morning, our utility bill arrived. Dallas water. Still expensive, still a worry. But Sophie had decorated the envelope again. This time she'd drawn 3 stick figures working together, tools in their hands with the caption, "Team Miller fixes everything." She'd added Joe to our family without ceremony or discussion, simply accepting that family was defined by presence and effort, not by blood or legal documents. The sunflowers on our balcony reached toward morning light, and through our workshop door I could see the line of broken things waiting to be made whole again. Some people fix the world through violence and strategy. I'd learned that you could also fix it one bicycle at a time, one family at a time, one sunflower seed at a time. The latter was slower, smaller, less dramatic, but it let me sleep at night and look my daughter in the eye every morning. That made it the better mission. 6 months after the prison incident, on a morning that smelled of coffee and motor oil, Sophie placed a drawing on our workshop table. 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun, standing beside what was clearly meant to be our repair workshop. Above them, in her careful handwriting, "Our family fixes things." I stood there, socket wrench in hand, looking at my daughter's definition of us. Not blood-related, not legally bound, but family nonetheless. Joe wiped his hands on a rag, studying the drawing. "Sophie, you sure about this? Including an old drunk in your family picture?" "You're not old," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "And you're not a drunk anymore. You're Joe and you're here every day. That makes you family." I thought about the family I'd lost to war, the Delta Force brothers who hadn't come home, the wife who couldn't live with my demons, the future I'd imagined that had burned away in foreign deserts. And I thought about this family, built from prison janitorial work, late-night repairs, shared coffee, and a 12-year-old girl's inclusive heart. "If you both want me," Joe said quietly, "I want to stay, not just as a friend or business partner, as family." I nodded, feeling something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for years. "Welcome home, Joe." Sophie hugged both of us, squeezing tight enough that my still-healing ribs protested slightly. That afternoon, we painted the workshop sign together. Miller and Thompson Repairs. We fix what's broken. Hanging it proudly outside our maintenance room turned small business. Mrs. Rodriguez was our first customer of the day, bringing her grandson's bicycle with a bent frame. "Can you fix it?" she asked. "He got hit by a car. He's okay, but the bike." I examined the frame, seeing the impact point, the way metal had compressed and twisted. In another life, I would have been the one causing this kind of damage, calculating force and trajectory for tactical advantage. "We can fix it," I told her. "Good as new." As Joe and I worked the metal back into shape, Sophie did homework at the corner table. The sunflowers on our balcony visible through the workshop door. Bright yellow, impossibly cheerful, thriving despite diesel fumes and industrial noise. "Dad," Sophie said during our lunch break, "my teacher asked what makes me proud. I told her my dad used to save the world, but now he saves our neighborhood. Is that okay?" I knelt beside her chair. "Sophie, that's more than okay. That's everything." That evening, the three of us stood on our balcony, looking out over Dallas as lights began to flicker on across the city. Joe's daughter had called again. She was coming to visit next week, bringing his grandchildren. My bracelet from Sophie, red, white, and blue fabric, was worn now, faded from work and water and daily wear. But it still reminded me what mattered. Not the missions I'd completed or the enemies I'd defeated, but the family I'd chosen and who had chosen me back. Some soldiers never stop fighting. I'd learned that the best battles were the ones you fought with love, patience, and a socket wrench, fixing what was broken, one small repair at a time. If you see yourself somewhere in this story, subscribe to HA Stories and leave a question you'd like to be healed. If you found yourself in this story, subscribe HA Stories.